Welcome, welcome! Behold! Drain Skill! Drain Skill is a destruction spell that temporarily lowers a skill of your choice. Most times I hear it mentioned is in regards to training. The player drains his or her own skill in order to make their training cheaper, or to get more of it after they've already outgrown their current trainer. But how good is Drain Skill in combat? Looking at the cost first, it's 1/5 of the cost of fire damage. 100 points of fire damage on touch costs 50 magicka, while Drain Skill, 100 points, costs only 10 magicka. This may seem absurdly cheap, but just like any drain spell except potentially drain health if you use it correctly, the effect is only temporary, and it will immediately end as soon as the spell does. So a duration of 1 second is basically useless, unless you do actually use it just for training. If we increase the spell's duration to 10 seconds, it now costs 55 magicka. I am of the firm opinion that temporary debuffs should be substantially cheaper than direct damage. Same for spells that temporarily strengthen you. If you want to make players do things in a more interesting way, you should make the more interesting way easier to afford than the boring, straightforward way. Just like in politics, it's all about the incentives. Having said that, the cost of Drain Skill is okay-ish for Morrowind standards. Definitely better than some other debuffing spells like Disintegrate or Drain Magicka. I would still want it cheaper, ideally, but it's not terrible. It will usually not be necessary to use a 100-point spell. As I've said in my video about sound, NPCs with the highest skills usually have those skills be around 60 to 80. This does change up a bit when you go into expansion territory, but outside of Solstheim and Mournhold, NPCs with higher skill numbers are comparatively rare, mostly reserved for master trainers and the occasional outlier like Terrana or Umbra. Umbra, by the way, has 90 in Longblade, medium armor, which he's wearing, and also in block. There's also no need to reduce an enemy's skill to 0 exactly. It does help, but an enemy with only 15 in their attack skill will still miss often, especially if their relevant attribute is low, meaning either agility or willpower depending on whether it's a magic or weapon skill. So you can get away with less than 100 most of the time, and oftentimes 50 or even 30 points of Drain Skill can still be plenty, especially when doing the earlier missions. Drain Skill, 50 points for 10 seconds on touch costs 27 magicka, while 30 for also 10 seconds costs 16 magicka. But let's take a look at how these things work out in practice, shall we? In Morrowind, an enemy's chance to hit with a weapon is the attacker's hit rate minus the defender's dodge rate, or evasion. Which means that in order to not get hit, you can either do stuff on your end, so you improve your evasion rate, or you make your enemy more clumsy with their weapon. We are talking about an offensive spell here, so we will at first ignore evasion and focus only on the hit rate. The formula on how the hit rate is calculated looks like this. And no, you're not crazy. Bethesda did an oopsie and accidentally made blind increase hit chance instead of decreasing it. Is it a bug or is it a feature? Let us do what I like to call the Snowy Granius test. I will take the stats of our dear friend on the bridge and insert them into the formula in order to calculate his default hit rate. His axe skill is 32, his agility is 32, his luck is 40. He is not affected by either fortify attack or blind, and we will assume his fatigue bar is full. And the result is 53! Which is honestly lower than I expected, but he is a starting enemy that will first use Conjuration and Destruction before he switches to his weapon, if the both of you are still alive at that point. If we reduce his axe skill to 0 while keeping everything else the same, his hit rate at full fatigue turns into 13. Both of these values will be further lowered by the evasion rate. The evasion formula looks like this. Let's assume we are using neither Chameleon nor do we have Sanctuary. Our fatigue bar is empty, and we have the worst possible starting attributes, without using either the Bitter Cup damage attribute, mods or console commands. So 30 in agility and 40 in luck. If we enter those stats in the equation, we get 7.5. So if we reduce Snowy Grannis's axe skill to 0, his initial 45.5% chance to hit us turns into 5.5%. What a deal! If our fatigue is full, then even with those shitty stats, Snowy Grannis's hit chance turns into a staggering 0.5%, assuming I calculated everything correctly. Of course, your enemy can still get lucky, even if you lower their skill, although maybe not at 0.5% chance. And if their agility is 100, their chance to hit will never quite fall that low to begin with, unless your own agility is very high too. Or you hit them with damage agility to lower it. Case in point, when I was making this video that you can see on the screen right now, I had this problem of my character, Smitty, whatever, hitting too often for demonstration purposes. And then I remembered she was wearing both the Fists of Randagulf and the Ring of the Wind, which I then took off. That was a good 50 agility increase, right there. But their chance to hit will still fall substantially. Hitting you less often is still useful, even if their chance to hit you is not quite as low as you would like it to be. Overall, my conclusion is that Drain Skill can be an effective debuff for weapon-using enemies, if you're willing to pay the magicka cost and are willing to create a spell for each weapon's skill separately. And like I said, you don't need to actually get it to 0 for it to have some effect, though you should probably get it as low as you can afford to get it. Blind costs the exact same amount of magic as Drain Skill, but as you saw in the equation, it will do the exact opposite of what it's supposed to do in vanilla. This bug is fixed by the code patch and by Open Microwave. I'm also going to assume that it just turns the plus into a minus. If that's all the fix does, then Blind is, due to its different place in the equation, a bit less effective than Drain Skill. Let's compare lowering Snowy Grannis's axe skill by 30 on one hand, and on the other hand we'll keep the skill number the same but subtract 30 points for Blind. Then I'll remove 7.5 for evasion at minimum attributes and 0 fatigue for us. The result is that lowering Snowy Grannis's skill by 30 gets him an 8% hit chance, while using 30 points of Blind instead gives him a 15.5% hit chance. Blind does have the advantage of decreasing the hit chance for all weapon skills, not just one. You'll have to be much more specific with Drain Skill. Now let's look at magic casters. The formula that determines whether someone is successful at casting a spell looks like this. We can insert the data from Snowy Grannis into this equation as well, those being 38 destruction, 35 in willpower, 40 in luck. Since we're using Drain Skill, we'll say he isn't affected by sound, and we'll also say that he's at full fatigue. Oh, and his go-to destruction spell costs 7 magicka, which is also information we need to insert. With these stats, Snowy Grannis has an exactly 100% chance of successfully casting this destruction spell. With fatigue empty, his chance to cast drops to 60%. So, low fatigue can screw you over quite substantially if your stats are shit. But you probably knew all of this already, right? This is not necessarily the case at high skill levels, because your chance of success can pretty substantially surpass 100%. If we lower Snowy Grannis's destruction by 20 points into it being 18 destruction, 100% turns into 50% at full fatigue, and 30% at no fatigue. If we lower it by another 10 points to 8 destruction, this now becomes 25% at full fatigue and 15% at empty fatigue. And at 0 destruction it's 5% or 3% respectively. All of this to say that draining magic skills can also be potentially very effective too. In case I was too subtle, casting success is also lowered by the spell's cost. So if an enemy has a high magic skill but their spells are fairly expensive, the spell cost may provide enough negative effect that a relatively low magnitude drain spell can still significantly reduce their chances. But that is dependent on the individual NPC in question. In comparison to sound, it has a greater effect on the chances of a successful cast, and it's also cheaper. Let's compare the effect of sound to drain skill on Snowy Granius by using the same magnitude for both spells. So as we've established earlier, if we lower Snowy Granius' destruction by 30 points from 38 to 8, he now has a 25% chance of casting the 7 Magicka spell. If instead we keep his destruction as is and instead use 30 points of sound, his chances of success is 62.5%. The funny thing here is that sound, the spell that would require a higher magnitude for the same effect, is also already more expensive at the same magnitude. 30 points of sound for 10 seconds of touch costs 49 Magicka, while 30 points of drain skill for 10 seconds of touch costs only 16 Magicka. Of course, the problem with drain skill is that it's very specific. There are a total of 27 skills in Morrowind and you will need to cast the right one in order to get the desired effect. If your enemy uses a long sword, then draining their blunt weapon will do exactly nothing to weaken them. Now, to be fair, some of those can't be used in combat, such as security or alchemy, or at least I don't know how they could be. So there's no combat use in draining some of them. And even if we exclude everything that's not a weapon or a spellcasting magic skill, we are still left with 13 skills. It's not a problem if you're facing an individual enemy, but it does get a bit awkward if you want to use an area of effect spell on a group, and each of them uses a different weapon. Another problem is that while drain skill is not as expensive as some other weakening spells, I would suggest, normally, that you create an enchantment instead. But that would mean you would have to create a separate item for each skill that you will feel you will need, which means a separate soul gem, a separate soul, and a separate mountain of gold for each of them. Not good. There is also the tiny, minuscule problem that you can permanently disable any spellcaster by using damage intelligence to reduce their intelligence and therefore their magicka to 0. I'm sure you already know how that feels like. And you can use damage strength to permanently make an enemy unable to move, which is very effective on anyone that does not use ranged combat. Though permanent in this case means that the effect will persist until you leave their cell for 72 in-game hours and their stats return to default. It feels like I forgot something, but since I can't remember what it is, I'll move on to Oblivion. Post-production Imperatia here. I've remembered. Firstly, I wanted to mention the possibility of indirectly reducing an enemy's armor rating with drain skill, making it easier to brutally murder them as a consequence. I wasn't going to do calculations for that part because I've done quite enough of that for one video, but you can see on screen how long it takes me to kill Umbra with the same weapon and same stats while he's at 90, 40 and 10 medium armor. So enjoy that. The second thing that I forgot to mention is that I don't like the idea of using drain skill on mages so much, because their magicka is a limited resource that they don't regenerate. You can simply watch them run out by dodging their attacks. With weapon using enemies it makes more sense to me because they can just keep on attacking. Anyway, that's it, let's continue to Oblivion. In Oblivion, drain skill also appears. 100 points of drain skill for 1 second on touch costs 11 magicka, at 75 destruction. At that same skill level, 100 points of fire damage costs 136 magicka. Of course, just like in Morrowind, drain is temporary, and will need a longer duration to get a fairer assessment. 100 drain skill for 10 seconds on touch costs 118 magicka at 75 destruction. If we restrain ourselves with the magnitude a little bit, you'll see that drain magicka 50 points for 10 seconds on touch costs 48 magicka, while 30 costs 25. 30 for 30 seconds is 75 magicka, while 50 for 30 seconds is 145 magicka. But please do be aware that skills do not do the same thing in Oblivion than they did in Morrowind. Magic skills can no longer fail, and weapon skills can no longer miss. So you can't prevent your enemy from either casting or hitting you at all, but draining a weapon skill does lower their damage for the duration of the spell, and draining a magic skill makes their spell substantially more expensive. I would need to do some more testing in order to fully assess how useful drain skill could be in Oblivion, but I could imagine that reducing at least an enemy boss's damage to a minimum would help with survivability a lot. And targeting the mages would make them waste a lot of their mana on just a few spells, so I'm not gonna discount this one. But the Oblivion part of this video is more of a cameo, and I would probably make a separate video if I wanted to do a full in-depth look on how it is. And this video is already getting stupidly long. There is no damage skill in either game, although Morrowind does have the effect in the construction set, and from what I know, the unique item Fury, which you can find in Kogorun, used to have several effects of damage skill on self instead of drain. And some very talented people must have equipped it without checking beforehand, or saving beforehand, and it would basically permanently ruin their build on that save. So that must have been fun. I guess that's why it was changed in an official patch. Also, all the cards that I've spoken about in this video have been for on-touch spells, which is admittedly not ideal, as that means you're basically in the range where you could French kiss the enemy or suck them off. But I generally don't want to sow confusion for the comparisons by also adding on target. But on target spells are my preferred way of doing things, despite the stupid added cost. Anyway, enough of this crap. If you like the video, you can learn about how good sound is next. Thanks for watching and try not to die until next video.